All right, very excited. As you guys know, this is a podcast that has spouted off a lot about the fun purple team in Fort Worth that's been balling this year. And so to help spread more TCU propaganda, we brought in the big guns here. Parker Fleming from the Purple Theory Podcast. You can also check him out on Twitter at StatsO'War, tweeting out all of the best charts and graphics possible, trying to explain college football to the masses. Parker, how you feeling, man?
I can't believe I've woken up twice now since the game is over, and every day I woke up expecting the whole process to have been a dream. It's just amazing what Sonny Dykes has done this season, and the fact that TCU won this dang football game on Saturday.
It really is. And I don't think can be overstated what an incredible year-over-year turnaround this has been. Like, did you have a moment, was there a game during the season where you started to kind of dream about what could be possible or what this team might be capable of on the top end?
Yeah, so in the offseason, my podcast co-host Grant and I really talked about, looking at the schedule, looking at where TCU's been. 8-4 would just be a great season for this TCU program. Sonny Dykes comes in, level sets, and says, hey, let's restore some normalcy, and then let's build. And when TCU came back from down 17 against Oklahoma State, that was the point where we thought, okay, you could explain every win up there. Oklahoma, Dylan Gabriel got hurt. Kansas, their defense is what it is, and Jalen Daniels was out for significant time there. They come back and just do this Oklahoma State thing, and you think, oh, there's some mojo here. There's something weird going on. And I still kind of thought maybe they're gonna come back to earth. Maybe they're gonna hit some negative regression. And that Texas game, man, was maybe the most stressful football watching experience in my entire life. And that was when I thought, okay, I think, that weekend on the podcast, we said, you know what? We have to start using the P word. We have to start talking about the playoff here because this is a reality staring us in the face right now. So kind of nice to see them, incrementally get more serious attention as they prove themselves through this gauntlet. But definitely that Oklahoma State game was like, there might be something going on here, which is really, really fun.
I remember I was on the call for that game. That was my first of two trips to Fort Worth this season, and it was pretty incredible to watch that in person. But you mentioned, and this is the question I always got asked as the outsider coming in, is from the national level, what's the perspective on this team? What are people saying? What's that conversation? What was that like on this big stage now to watch the way that some of the nation who still hadn't kind of come in and done their due diligence or homework on TCU? What was it like kind of watching the reception of this team on the biggest platform the sport has to offer?
Well, it's been really, really great. I mean, I think you saw this offseason, there was a couple Big 12 teams that did a really good job with access and got some reporters in and said, let's, because there is some PR to that, but there's also some, hey, we're building something exciting, come see. TCU has been closed, radio silence, not very open at all. So just to see videos from training camp was just amazing as a TCU fan. Like, oh, we're allowed to have fun with this. This is great. And I think that it was really fun to watch kind of the national respect and the national backlash. But the best part about it is Sonny Dykes has been so open. I mean, can you imagine a TCU football coach wearing a Hypnotoad hoodie and going on Barstool and talking about drinking with Dana Holgorsen? Like, what are we doing right now? They've just embraced the media side of it so well. And I really think that the Michigan game was kind of the culmination of people see a non-power. They see a small private school with a weird mascot that's in Texas that should be the little brother to the flagship universities there. And they think, oh, no way they can compete. And that's been, that was 2010, right? That's no way they could ever beat Wisconsin, right? They can't compete here. And TCU's heard that time and time again. So really nice for them to get the respect they deserve all season and then back it up with a win on a national stage against one of the best teams in the country.
How much of this is also vindication from the very first college football playoff season? Because I know in talking to people, that was always kind of the specter in the background and in the minds for a lot of TCU fans who were of a certain age, who were, have conscious memories of that run and what happened to them at the hands of Ohio State in the last ranking.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly we were prepared for kind of a perverse irony of TCU being kept out in 2014 because they didn't have the conference championship game, and then potentially being kept out in 2022 because they lost the conference championship game. But certainly validating not only that TCU was finally allowed a path to play for a national championship, but that they showed up and they did compete. That's super vindicating. especially for this team that, hasn't gone to a bowl. In 2020, they qualified, but the game was canceled. And a guy like Max Duggan, who from day one was expected to redshirt, had to come in and start, has been through so much. This is just the realization for a great group of seniors and some guys who have really, really been through it. So on multiple levels, this has just been an extremely satisfying and gratifying season. It's exactly what Fort Worth and the program needed at the right time.
So that year-to-year change, because people have pointed out, there's some portal guys that jumped in here. You had starters, especially on the defensive side of the ball, that came from outside of the fold. But in general, it's a lot of the same roster from a team last year that wasn't bowl eligible. So what was the biggest change outside of maybe like vibes? This seems like one of the premier vibes teams in the country for all the Sonny Dykes related program access and just relaxed vibe that he sort of brought to the table.
Yeah, so definitely the vibe ship, talked about they're doing the Hypnotoad meme more than they ever have, and the videos from spring practice. Obviously, their strength and conditioning program, I think, has gotten a lot better as well, and that's really paid some dividends with health down the season. In a season where everyone in the Big 12 had health problems, TCU really didn't, and I think that's the result of some of this offseason work they've done. Additionally, I believe that what TCU used to do on offense was say how the target equation, like what they were trying to maximize, was how do we maximize scoring while minimizing any potential error at all? And that is really a little bit of a scared way. But the most important thing is that it isn't saying what do we have and how do we make the best out of this. It is saying how can we do as little as possible and still win. Huge fundamental shift here with a guy like Max Duggan, for instance, at quarterback. There are offenses Max Duggan cannot run. He can't do it. He's not going to be able to do, if you ask him to do things that he can't do. But when you design an offense to highlight his strengths, to get him to do what he is best at, being mobile, making one or two reads, throwing those passes over the middle of the field, which he really wasn't, they weren't doing before. That offensive philosophy, I think, matters a whole lot. And on the flip side, with the defense, I think you get a lot of people who the switch from Gary Patterson's kind of half field, calling out all 11 responsibilities every play, to a little bit more if-then reactionary principles-based defense has allowed some of these guys a longer athletic leash. So in addition to Mark Perry, Johnny Hodges coming out of nowhere, you have guys like Dylan Horton, Tre'Vius Hodges-Tomlinson, D. Winters, who are able to highlight their athleticism, have a longer leash in this defense, and reach that kind of next level as well. So definitely some vibes, definitely some personnel. Also just some slight tweaks in scheme that kind of highlighted and maximized the talent on this roster, which was third best talent in the Big 12 by far in terms of team talent composite coming into this season.
You mentioned with Max Duggan some of the strengths there. Where are you at? Because I've seen, as we've gotten more and more closer to this, a lot of people calling him right-handed Tebow or Ginger Tebow there. Is there any part of that comparison other than maybe the desire to go out there and leave every game like bloodied with your jersey tattered in the way that Max does, just with the style and effort?
Definitely has the heart and the gamesmanship for sure. I think that the image a lot of people have of Max Duggan is him running for his life for the last 3 years between some poor offensive line play, some schematic fits that weren't great, and then being a little overwhelmed. And so I think that his legs are certainly valuable, but he's much more valuable with that. Hey, I have a cannon. I can put the ball downfield where I need to go. There are going to be some of those passes over the middle of the field. He's going to come in a little too hot, but I think his kind of calm under pressure and that deep threat where if you don't respect it and Quentin Johnston gets behind you, Max Duggan's going to find him. And we've seen that happen multiple times this season. So his legs and his rushing ability have been great. He's rushed fewer times this season than he has in any season in his career because he's able to run those pass plays and get through those progressions and scramble less and have a little bit more time. I might say he has a better arm than Tebow. I don't know if he's as good a runner as Tebow, so I might calibrate that a little bit, but certainly love to see a kid play 4 years, loves the sport of football, and like literally wants to bleed to win, which is just really fun.
Wants to bleed and lick his fingers, apparently, as I saw that go viral on the TCU TikTok once he kind of hit the internet with that. But the defense was also interesting because there was a lot of the talk going into the Michigan game about Michigan going to bring the Big 10 to the Big 12 and these sort of notions of the 3-3-5 that a lot of people were projecting, which is wild to me that we were acting like the 3-3-5 was some sort of new concept for people, and maybe this is outside of Big 12 country where people have not been used to the defensive revolution that's gone on inside this conference for a while now, but how stunned were you by that, the perception of this defense heading into the game, which clearly erased that with conviction early on?
Yeah, I went on a couple of Michigan podcasts, and there was all these questions about physicality and kind of like, well, Michigan's going to have 5 big linemen. How are they not just going to blow past the 3 down linemen on TCU's defense? And frankly, a lot of that is stuck in like 2005. Like the tight front has been around for a really, really long time. And the issue is specifically with Gillespie's defense. He calls it, the spill and kill. And so you're going to see a guy like Dominic Williams, a defensive tackle who was 17 coming into camp this spring. And has been awesome as a freshman. You're going to see him play and not get any stats, not get tackles, not get pressures very often, because his role is soak up the A gaps, and the big man can do that. And they're going to try and funnel it out to the B gaps. They're going to try and funnel it outside and let those linebackers make hits there. And so it is very confusing for an offensive line that thinks, hey, we're just going to run our normal blocking assignments and be able to find those guys. Sometimes you might be more physical than the other team, but if you don't know where to block them and you don't know where they're going to be, there's not really a lot you can do about that. So hopefully, one, credit to Joe Gillespie for doing a great job against the team where if they had tried to line up in a bear front or something, they would have gotten pushed around. 2, I hope this is a reckoning moment for a lot of people to say, like, hey, I can understand that football is more than big man push small man. You can, and that's something TCU's been doing forever. You think about the Gary Patterson quote, speed baby, back in 2005 or whatever. And so it's definitely a slightly different way to look at football, but challenging, I think, in a good sense to think, oh, the offenses are so sophisticated, RPOs, screens, all this stuff they're doing. That's really complicated. Defenses in college football these days are as complicated and as sophisticated as offenses, really seeing a little bit of a catch up, especially in the Big 12 with this tight front that lets you have this extra defender do so much more than a lineman would.
So from that standpoint, I'll include defense on this then, because you brought this up before. It allows different types of defenders to shine. It gave guys a different opportunity, maybe body type wise that didn't fit in Gary's defense, or just skill set wise offered them that new spot. I'll go offense and defense, and I want to exclude Max from this since quarterback tends to get an outside view of this. Who's the most important player on each side of the ball for this TCU team as it currently sits?
Offense is absolutely going to be Mark Perry, the Colorado transfer. I wouldn't say that he's the best player on this defense, but the way the defense works is they are funneling the run game for him to make tackles. He has 66 tackles, leads the team from the secondary there. He is going to come in and make those tackles. He's absolutely kind of the linchpin for this run defense this season, and has been really, really great. I could list you reasons why I think 5 or 6 other guys are so important, but he leads the team in tackles. He is that run and fitting kind of swing linebacker safety, and it's just been so valuable. I can't imagine TCU's defense this season without him.
And what about offensively outside of Max? Yeah.
As for the offense, it's just hard to not say Quentin Johnston. Just to see a guy realize his potential, and not that he has been bad in his past, right? Like, he's been good every year, but for them to finally get the offense where he's going, can move the ball around, 3.22 yards per route run, just super productive. And that includes a couple games where he was, hobbled and didn't play. That includes a couple games where he was kind of a decoy and TCU pursued some other options. He's been so great. Average depth of target of 12.9 yards and still averaging almost 9 yards after the catch. Like, just a huge option for TCU, can get separation so reliably. You saw it against Michigan. When stuff starts hitting the fan, they're going to find a way to get the ball to QJ and he's going to make a play. That's been the dream. And he can do it all. He can do it running across run across the field in the screen. He can do it one-on-one and burn a guy. You'll see him with his back to the defender a ton. He's almost playing like, I think our friend Richard Johnson talked about, he was like a soccer forward, because he catches the ball with his back to the defense and then just makes a move and it's gone. It's so impressive. And really the offense goes as far as he goes. I will impose on time and just say Kendre Miller, the running back, got lost in Zach Evans' shadow and has done an amazing job and is an absolutely underrated rusher. He's super important for this offense too. Those 2 guys have just been so good for TCU and so great that they stuck around.
Yeah, and and God, credit in this last game to DeMercado and what he did stepping in for Kendre in the middle of that game when he went down very early in that one. But you're right, that was the number one takeaway for me after the Oklahoma State game that I did, was Quentin Johnston is just different. And he falls into that unique category of player that I talk about, which is nothing this big should move this well. And because he can do so much and you can put him in so many places, making him that sort of chess piece like that becomes a real matchup nightmare for a lot of teams, which I guess I want to touch briefly on the Michigan game before we look ahead a little bit now, just to say, when you look back on the Michigan game now and what happened there, we've talked about the defense and their ability, certainly the turnover, but what stuck out to you as the reason why TCU was able to come in and ultimately win that game the way they did, hang on to win that game the way they did?
I have two reasons that I think are just very, very simple. One, the turnover early on and the stop, the goal line stop, and then the pick six put TCU in a positive game script. And Michigan was not allowed to get in a positive game script and then lean on opposing teams, which is what they've been able to do, even if it's in the second half, right? They've kind of messed around in the first half sometimes this season. But the worry was if TCU can get into, or if Michigan can get into a positive game script, they're just going to be able to slow the game down, lean on TCU, and run away with this thing. That turnover, that goal line stop, the defense immediately absolutely changed the outcome of this game from the very beginning. Secondly, that stands out is Garrett Riley, the offensive coordinator. TCU had two big passing plays. One was only a 6-yard, but it was their second offensive touchdown, 83-yard drive, very, very big to Tay Barber, and then that 76-yarder to Quentin Johnston. Mike, those were the same play. And they're a Lincoln Riley special. If you've watched Oklahoma, you know that kind of little dagger screen where he comes behind the line and makes a play. But on both of those, Max Duggan caught the ball, immediately ran backwards, and just got away from the pressure that was overwhelming them, found a way to get the ball to their guy and go. And for Garrett Riley to dial those up, I mean, obviously those 14 points were integral to this 6-point win, but I think the way that they were able to scheme around the pressure was so impressive and still win this game, even though I think it's not one of their best offensive games of the season, understandably, because defenses like Michigan's are great and hard to move the ball against.
Yeah, no, but to your point, like that's kind of what TCU's been able to do all year is sort of be malleable to the situation and find all these different ways. They've got so many tools in the bag, and you're absolutely right with the tone set early in that game. So I know it's very early looking ahead at a game that will be played next Monday, and for both sides, there's going to be some questions about injury availability for some key parts. Darnell Washington, the tight end on the other side, we mentioned Kendre Miller, who went down early on in this game here. But when you look at what happened in the Peach Bowl with the ways Ohio State was able to stress Georgia, especially on the back end defensively, how much of that do you believe TCU can replicate walking into this game, as the opening line I saw was 13.5-point underdogs to the defending champs?
Yeah, I think certainly there's some issue where you thought, man, I wish like the opponent that Georgia played before TCU had done like a bunch of running or something and not keyed Georgia in acutely to the weaknesses of their pass defense potentially, because TCU will try to win similar style of we have athletes and we're going to try and get them the ball and let them make plays. I really think that TCU will be aggressive, but the big issue for me is what TCU can do with Jalen Carter. I'm terrified of that man, as I think anyone who lines up across from him is. Given his whatever his involvement will be, how much he plays, if he can really disrupt up front, especially because TCU in the run and the pass game does so much, GC, GT counter kind of stuff and moving around. If he can disrupt that, you get TCU into these 3rd and 9 situations. That's going to be really tough when you have a team full of 5 stars just pinning their ears back saying, we're just going to come out, we're going to double Quentin Johnston, we're going to come after Max Duggan. I don't know. I stopped tracking this at one point because I was too nervous in the game. But one point, I believe in the second half, up into the second half against Michigan, TCU was averaging about a 3.2 average distance on 3rd down. Which is way above their season average, and they were so good on early downs, they completely negated one of Michigan's best assets. With Georgia, that's going to have to be so important too. And if Jalen Carter can really disrupt, it'll be interesting to see if TCU and Kendre Miller can get to the outside, if they can kind of establish a rushing floor to then give them the opportunities, more plays, conversions, so that they can try and get that home run ball there. On the flip side, I love TCU's corners. I don't know how you couldn't love THT and Josh, as we call him, Josh Fig Newton. He's come out of nowhere, and they've been great. And one-on-one coverage, they can go step for step with almost anyone in the country. That frees up the interior of your defense, gives you extra men, basically. And so I'm interested to see how Georgia tries to scheme guys open and not just because they know they have to test cornerbacks a little bit more than they did against Ohio State. It's going to be a little bit rougher there as well.
You mentioned the 5-star element of this. I want to hit, before I let you go, the kind of big picture conversation around this TCU team, because we hear all the time from Bud Elliott and company about the blue chip ratio and this notion of what you need to be able to win a national championship or compete in the playoff at the highest level. Do you think, especially now in portal and NIL era where we're seeing more player mobility and ways to change your team and impact than ever before, is this TCU team emblematic of something that becomes more possible, especially in an expanded playoff field now? Or is this, hey, great circumstance, right coach, right roster, right time, and we shouldn't read too much into this?
Yeah, so you certainly have to look at like the 2 years in the Big 12 before this with Baylor and with Iowa State kind of being that non-Oklahoma power in the Big 12, as it were, and how close they were to getting to the playoff, even though they weren't quite there. TCU definitely had some help. I think it's very important to say contextually, Oklahoma having some issues this season, and TCU getting a couple bounces definitely helped catapult them in the playoff. But like I said earlier, third best team talent composite in the Big 12 by a large margin. And so I think that specifically with the transfer portal, what becomes more important is your two deep and who's actually playing, and not necessarily the guys in practice and that depth, which has mattered so much before. And as much as I love Bud, and he and I have talked about this before, the blue chip ratio has been non-falsifiable up until now. You think about these teams like the Utahs and the TCUs and the UCFs and the Boise States that weren't allowed to compete for a national championship, so we don't really know if they could have won one. This is the second time, last year being Cincinnati, that the blue chip ratio is actually being empirically tested. I think it's a great heuristic for kind of who's doing the best and who should we look for the national championship. But empirically, we get a nice, natural experiment here to test it as well. I also think that one thing we'll see with these recruiting rankings is that fit's going to matter a whole lot more. I think we need to be looking at team talent composite by position, because it's going to matter a whole lot more. You think about Quentin Johnston, if he's not there, you replace him with a random 4-star, TCU's offense doesn't work. And so fit matters so much for some of these guys too, especially as they can drop down, they can move up and move around and find a better situation to maximize their talent. So the fluidity there, I think, only benefits those teams who have, recruiting rankings in the 30s, but need that one extra gear. They can get that through the transfer portal now.
I've said this repeatedly over the last few days as we got the outcome that we did in the Cotton Bowl, certainly saw what TCU was able to do and a number of other teams. The supporters of playoff expansion have been handed gift after gift with the results that they've seen from really the teams ranked 5, I'd say starting 3 down through 12 of, hey, this is what can be possible, especially in a lot of these early round games as you look to expand the biggest party in college football and make it a more inclusive conversation about a lot of these teams, so we don't have to explain the merits of the 3-3-5 to people once we get to the college football playoff. Hopefully everyone can be a lot more well acquainted with that a lot sooner. People can get acquainted with that and everything else TCU related over at the Purple Theory Podcast. Parker, appreciate the time, man. Enjoy the week in the lead up. Enjoy the experience. I know there's a lot of people rooting for TCU and that incredible hypnotic toad.
Man, I love it. Thanks so much for having me, Mike. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure we'll chat soon.
Boom. Money in the bank.